All right. Just so everyone is aware, this meeting is going to be recorded and will be available to watch on YouTube. If you have to leave early or would like to review it at any point, I will be sending an email following up with a link to the recording as well as a survey about this session. So welcome everyone to the Chagrin River Watershed Partner Speaker Series. Excuse me there. Presentation with Sarah Barrow, Watershed Coordinator with Summit Soil and Water Conservation District. Sarah earned her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Akron and completed her river conservation-focused master's degree from Miami of Ohio. At Summit Soil and Water Conservation District, she works with local communities and organizations to develop and implement watershed management solutions. Excuse me. Sarah will be presenting stream monitoring volunteer program and volunteer retention strategies. Thanks for attending. My name is Maggie. I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with Chagrin River Watershed Partners. And before this formal presentation with Sarah, I'm just going to give some background on the speaker series, CRWP, and the Chagrin River Watershed. All right. So CRWP hosts these webinars each winter to spring by partnering with environmental professionals to engage and educate other interested professionals and members of the community about environmental protection. Some quick background, the Chagrin River Watershed is a high-quality watershed neighboring the Cuyahoga River watershed. This high-quality title comes from the Chagrin River having over 71 miles that are designated as scenic, as well as having cold water streams and supporting a population of Ohio brook trout. However, it is still impacted by development activities which increase flooding, erosion, and water quality problems. Over 20 years ago, in 1996, 16 communities came together to form the Chagrin River Watershed Partners, pool knowledge and resources, and cost-effectively keep the watershed healthy as communities grow. Today, the partners' 35 members represent over 91% of the watershed in Cuyahoga, Geauga, Lake, and Portage counties. Here you can see a list of CRWP's current member communities. Chagrin River Watershed Partners is supported by member dues, grants, and donations. We provide technical assistance on land use planning to minimize flooding, erosion, and water quality issues, and focus on cost-effective solutions for communities and landowners. We also co-lead the Central Lake Erie Basin Collaborative, a regional partnership for healthy watersheds. Through this network, we provide technical assistance for watershed organizations all across Northeast Ohio. And then here is a summary of CRWP's wide variety of work. Our watershed skill work benefits all of our members and includes watershed planning, research, plus developing and updating model watershed protection codes. In addition to watershed skill work, CRWP collaborates with members on grant writing, helps communities adopt and implement codes, provides recommendations for development plans, supports compliance with stormwater requirements, and educates and empowers people to steward watersheds and tackle erosion and stormwater challenges. Most of our work with our members is supported through grants and service agreements secured by CRWP or members with CRWP's assistance or contracts with members. We are thankful to those that support our work and ability to protect Northeast Ohio's waterways. Today, you are here to hear about stream monitoring and the creation and evolution of Summit Soil and Water Conservation District's volunteer program, which monitors over 50 sites. Sarah will be discussing some basics of stream monitoring, highlights from their volunteer program, as well as Summit Soil and Water Conservation District's partnership with the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network. If you have any questions, please feel free to type any as we go into the chat, or you can save them for the end, and we will cover them towards the end. And with that, thank you very much, Sarah, and Summit Soil and Water Conservation District, and to those of you who are interested in the topic, and for bearing with me here. I will stop sharing my screen, and you can go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining. I'm gonna get my screen up and going so that you can see. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about our volunteer stream monitoring program. It's one of the initiatives that we have at Summit Soil and Water that I am the most proud of. a lot of that is because of just how involved the community has gotten. So I'm going to take you through kind of the creation of our program to the current evolution where we've kind of ended up now, some strategies that we're using to retain volunteers, and our collaboration with the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network. So for those of you who don't know, we are one of 88 conservation districts in Ohio. Each county has one. This is our current mission, that we provide leadership and advocate for stewardship of natural resources. And we do a lot of that through both technical assistance and education, and through building really strong partnerships with not just individuals in the community, but the communities themselves and other collaborative opportunities when they arise. So our watershed program is kind of broken down into four main areas: the Cuyahoga River watershed, the Tusk River watershed, our volunteer program, and kind of landowner assistance. We're in a really unique position in Summit County with the Continental Divide kind of running through the middle of the county. It is a natural division for where our watershed coordinators work and the work that we do. But our volunteer program spans the entirety of the county, so it's one of our few watershed area initiatives that encompasses all of Summit County. Okay, so our stream monitoring program was started in 2021. At that point, we had 10 volunteers and we monitored around 11 sites in two watersheds in the county. When we started it, we started monitoring in the Yellow Creek watershed and the Pigeon Creek watershed. So one in the Cuyahoga River Basin and one in the Tusk River Basin. And we kind of tried to set out some goals of what do we want this volunteer program to look like. So our initial goals were just to kind of get an understanding of what was the water quality in the area and what were some pollution sources that maybe we could start to identify areas that had non-point source pollution issues. And we really wanted to involve the community in doing that to help promote healthy watershed habits. So looking at the creation of the program, we had to decide what we wanted to use for monitoring these areas. For monitoring chemistry in a watershed, that you have a lot of options. YSI meters, you could use those individual little like pocket parameter meters, or things like this, these low-cost water monitoring kits from Stroud. They're really nice because they're cheap, they're super portable, it's easy to give one to a volunteer that they can keep with them for the entirety of the season. So lots of pros there, right? But a few negatives as well. Like these run like standard litmus tests. Yes or no, you kind of get a range of things, but you're not getting really high quality, very specific data. So it's really that qualitative versus quantitative, right? It can be open to interpretation. But this was a really nice way to kind of break into water quality monitoring for us. So we opted to go with these. We sampled for all of the chemical parameters that these kits monitor for, tested from June to September, found that it took our volunteers about 40-ish, maybe 50 minutes to do their chemistry monitoring with these kits. And then they would also do chloride for us from October to May. Chloride's much quicker, takes about 10 minutes for them to use these quant tabs that you see on the right-hand side. Each of the volunteers went through training to use these kits. It took about 2 hours to train them in the field with the watershed coordinators. We also made a video. Our AmeriCorps service member at the time made a video of how to use these kits that we could put on in a Google Classroom, which was really nice because it gave a volunteer somewhere that they could, like a central hub that they could go to revisit how to use these kits. But we did find that not everybody had Google accounts, so it made it a little bit tricky for the individuals who weren't already connected through Google. So these were the parameters that those low-cost water quality monitoring kits measured. You'll see a few highlighted in blue, and I'll talk more about that in a little while. So a pretty good list of things that you want to look for. And you see macroinvertebrates down here too. So they also were taught to monitor for macroinvertebrates. For this one, there are a lot less choices of kind of what you can use to collect macros, right? You've got Hester Denty samplers that you could put in the river, but they need to stay there for weeks at a time. Kick nets and seines and dip nets. So we ended up choosing dip nets because they seem to be the easiest for the volunteers to collect and analyze a sample with. They're low cost-ish, and they're still 120-ish bucks, so that's still a little bit of money. But we steered away from the Hester Denty samplers because those kind of require lab equipment. They require a lot of good IDing experience. Um, you really need multiple people to pick through the samplers and identify the organisms in it. So we found that dip nets work the best for our volunteers, and those actually we have not changed from those. We're still using those now. We've got 6 that we can loan out at any point in time to any one of our volunteers. So our volunteers who chose to monitor biology sampled from June through September. They used the pollution tolerance index. So they used this form that you see here on the right to quantify what organisms they were finding in the stream, what was their tolerance to pollution, and then total that score up and use a fair, poor, or a poor, fair, good, excellent scale. While there are a lot of more complicated um, tolerance indexes you can use, we found that this one worked really, really well for our volunteers. It's simple, it's easy to understand. They're only identifying to family level, like they're not having to go that deep. So this was another training that took about 2 hours, spending more time with the watershed coordinators, learning how to collect, learning how to ID, and learning how to complete the form. So in 2023, our program started to kind of undergo a pretty significant evolution. We went from monitoring with just those handful of volunteers in kind of scattered hucks and scattered sites throughout those watersheds. The kits, when we sent the kits home with the volunteers, we pretty much let them choose sites that were close to their house and monitor those throughout the season. In 2023, we decided to kind of standardize our entire process, and we picked locations in the Furnace Run watershed and the Yellow Creek watershed. Some of them are former or current OEPA sites. Others are of interest because maybe they were near somewhere that had recently gone through a restoration or somewhere that was near construction. In Furnace Run, of our 8 sites, 3 of them are cold water habitat, so we really wanted to get an eye on those to figure out what was happening in those cold water streams. So we moved up to doing 19 sites between just these 2 watersheds and had about 15 volunteers at this point that helped us. So you see a lot of these parameters are the same as the things that we saw before, but one of the biggest changes that happened in 2023 is we completely changed the equipment that we were using. So we went from using those low-cost water quality monitoring kits to switching to YSI meters. And we were able to switch to YSI meters because we joined the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network. And I'll talk more about the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network at the end of my presentation. But the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network had equipment that we were able to borrow for the season, which really kind of changed the face of our program. We expanded our training to include a lot more detail about the parameters they were sampling, and not just what they were sampling, but why they were sampling it, and what the data that they were retrieving for us, what it meant. We also decided at this point to develop a volunteer handbook, which covers stream basics, like features and chemical parameters, and how the parameters are affected maybe seasonally or daily. And while we're sampling for less parameters in 23 than we were the 2 seasons before, the sites we sampled nearly doubled, and the volunteer number increased as well. And that all was because of our collaboration with the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network. So what started in 23 really exploded in 24. I came on at Summit Soil and Water at the end of 2023, and then in the beginning of 2024, we ended up with two new additional watershed coordinators as well. So we went from sampling just those two watersheds, Furnace Run and Yellow Creek, and we added Wingfoot Lake, which is also in the Cuyahoga River Basin, and decided to start monitoring in the Tusk Basin too. So we added Portage Lakes and Headwaters Tusk at that same time. We also decided in 24 that we were going to make sampling for biology optional for our volunteers. That was a big hang up for a lot of them, is they were really intimidated by being in the field and having to try to identify macroinvertebrates independently without someone being there with them to help them. So we made it optional rather than mandatory, and we found that that actually really increased the amount of people who were willing to participate in our program. So we also started to really build and develop partnerships with some local groups and local agencies. So we have a data share program now with Summit Metro Parks. They do a lot of monitoring in the Furnace Run watershed as well, and we figured that it was probably time that we start sharing data with them. Um, the city of Akron actually has a level 2 sampling plan for a lot of the same sites that we have in the Wingfoot Lake watershed because we share the Little Cuyahoga River as kind of a target spot. So we share a lot of data with them as well. And then the Cleveland Water Alliance is the organization that houses the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network. And so we've worked really hard to kind of grow these partnerships to help increase not only the equipment that's available to us and the data that we're collecting, but the opportunities that are available to our volunteers. Oh, excuse me. I went down wrong. Okay, so a little overview about how our program currently worked this past year and kind of what we're moving into for this current season. So we have, sorry, my water went down, Rob. I'm going to sit here and cough.
No, you're good. If you need to take a moment, by all means.
All right, I'm good. So we have four YSI kits that are available to our volunteers at any point in time. We actually partner with the Akron Public Library System in Summit County, and we have four different libraries that we consider our library hubs. They house our meters for us, and we have a volunteer stream sign out. It's like a sign up genius that any of our volunteers can access at any point, and they can check the meters out from the libraries themselves. They just go to the library, they show their ID, they sign out the meter, they can keep it for 2 days, and then take it back when they're done. We found that moving our equipment to somewhere more accessible, like the libraries, greatly improved the ease of access for our volunteers. They didn't have to find time to come down to our facility, which is in downtown Akron. Our hours are 7:30 to 4, so not great hours for people who are already working. Nobody's there on the weekends. Libraries got around all of that for us. The branch managers have a really good relationship with the watershed department, and we make sure that they're trained on basic questions. They know how to get a hold of us if they have problems. They do a really good job of caring for our equipment when it's not in our hands. And then we just go and pick up the equipment once a month. Like I sign them all out for one day. I pick them all up, calibrate them, clean up anything that needs cleaned or replaced, refill data sheets or whatever, and then take it back to the library. All of our volunteers either undergo a mandatory training. We have a 2-hour training that we offer in April. We offer it usually one on the weekend and one during the week in the evening, where they learn about using the YSI, how to do biology, and they get their sites assigned. So we started making these flyers, the images you see on the left, that shows an overview of the watershed, and it has QR codes that lead directly to their site where they monitor and the easiest place to park near their site. And we take some pictures too of things that maybe they need to know. We kind of give all of our sites a danger rating, like is it on a busy road, or do you need to have a safety vest because you're wandering around in someone's woods? just so that our volunteers know what they're getting into before they head out to their site, especially for new volunteers or for previous volunteers who want to try a new site. It also has information about, do you need boots or waders? Is this site accessible from a bridge over stream? Um, so we've tried to really pack a lot of information into one little flyer that makes them expertly prepared before they go out onto their site. So, like I said, we've got mandatory training, unless they're a repeat volunteer. Something we also started doing recently is we've got quizzes that they can take on Google. We've got a quiz for the chemistry side and a quiz for the biology side. And as long as they get an 80%, then they kind of test out of the training and they don't have to come to the mandatory training. And we have beefed up our handbook. Um, they don't use that as much, but it's nice to give them a lot of access to. It's got our monitoring plan in it and some other really valuable information about the streams that they're in. And one of the things that we've really worked on in the last year is doing recognition events. So we actually just had an event this past Wednesday where we gave our volunteers all of the data from our 2024 season before I posted any of it online. We wanted to get them all together and show them all the work that they've been doing and explain what we as watershed coordinators see from the data that they're bringing into us. Where their problem sites maybe now in the watershed that I'm a little concerned about, that I'm going to want to pay attention to, or what are really cool things that they found that are exciting, and maybe we need to protect this area now because they found something interesting. So we do that right around this time. And then at the very end of the season, we get them all together as well and do just kind of a big thank you. We give them some swag and we make them some food. And this year we took them on a hike. We were at Bath Nature Preserve, so we took them on a hike the nature preserve and kind of talked about watershed things in the nature preserve. So this year we had almost 40 volunteers who regularly work with us. We've got some that kind of come in and out, but who aren't with us all of the time. We had 39 sites that we monitored, and our volunteers collected over 530 samples for us this year, just chemistry samples. They also collected about 40 macroinvertebrate samples. So our volunteers, if they sign up, they have to monitor chemistry once a month. They don't have to do biology unless they want to, because we as watershed coordinators go out and do all of our sites at least once a season. But we also have some macroinvertebrate training days where the watershed coordinators are already going to be out doing sampling. We open it up to our volunteers to come as well, to give them a little extra experience so that they start to feel more comfortable, and maybe they'll start to do biology on their own. Our staff also does QHEI and HHEI for all of our samples. That's one that we haven't put on our volunteers, and I don't think we will. We plan to offer them like a citizens QHEI training this year because they've shown that they're really interested in learning more about stream mechanics and stream ecology. So we're going to try and offer them more along those regards. So we take all of the information that they give us and we put it out to the public in a couple of ways. Through our partnership with the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network, we have access to Water Reporter. So this is a map of our current data for this year. It just went live yesterday after we gave it to our volunteers on Friday. You can dial into any one of our sites and see any of the samples that were taken all year long. We also are part of the Lake Erie Basin Assessment Framework through the Volunteer Science Network, and we put out the Watershed Health Report for Lake Erie. That draft is almost done and will be out in a couple months. It's a really interesting draft because it looks at all of the hubs that are in the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network, but it's also a lot to digest. It's like 140 pages long. You look at each watershed individually, and then you look at Lake Erie as a whole. So it can be a little much for a novice to kind of dig through. So one of the other initiatives that we're working on internally that I'm really excited about is putting together a watershed report card. So there's some organizations, I know Erie Conservation District does a really interesting watershed report card where they kind of take this data and put it into something that's very digestible to the public. That's on our 2025 goals, is to get one of those going too. Okay, so I've said the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network a couple times now. So for anybody who's not aware, I'm going to give it a little plug here. It's kind of what the end of my presentation talks about. So Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network is a group of, we call them hubs. They're independent organizations who monitor water quality within the Lake Erie Basin. Going into this season, we've actually got some Canadian groups that have joined. So now we'll have groups monitoring completely around all of Lake Erie, which I'm very excited to see how that data kind of starts to fall out. So the Lake Erie Volunteer Science Network is managed by Cleveland Water Alliance, and they really do a good job of making the network collaborative. So the local hubs, like Summit Soil and Water, we're a local hub. They also have collaborative partners, like I know NURSD is in there. We've had some OEPA representation before, and we all kind of work together to build these four things that you see at the bottom. So a community of practice. Uh, we work to really pair local hubs together to kind of share best practices and to collaborate together on building data around the Lake Erie Basin. The Lake Erie Basin Assessment Framework, that's kind of all of the data that we're pooling together and standardizing. That's been the biggest goal of one of the biggest goals of Levison, was to standardize the way, not only the data that we're collecting, but the way that we're collecting data, and then the way that we're turning around and utilizing that data, just to really build credibility and kind of capacity within the network itself. So also in the network, we've got three different working groups. Standards working group, which I'm one of the lead people on the standards working group, which really helps kind of define goals and develop new standards and new ideas for the network itself. There's an equity and justice working group and a sustainability and funding working group who work on those respective areas for the network as well. And then pilot projects are another big one that we've kind of started to be able to utilize through Levison. I don't know if anybody in here is familiar with Springfield Lake in Akron. Springfield Lake is in one of my target watersheds, the Wingfoot Lake watershed. Springfield Lake has had problems with harmful algal blooms since like 2019. It's been close to primary contact recreation because the microcystin levels are so high. So through this partnership with Levison, I actually got connected with an organization from England. They're called IO-Lite, and they make this little, it's probably like this big, compact microscope that works with your phone and connects to AI, and you can put water samples on it and it identifies all of the different algae in the sample, and it can give you a percentage of microcystin. And if you sequentially sample along a bank, you can get an idea as to what your microcystin levels are in the lake, which is an amazing product. And it's super easy to use, and it doesn't require somebody like me standing next to the municipality leaders who might not have as much idea about water quality to explain it to them, because it's run on AI. So that's an example of like a potential pilot project that we have access to because of our partner with Levison. Oh, so like I said, Levison's the big goal of the network is just to standardize. Standardizing has really increased the credibility of the data we're collecting, because I know that the data my volunteers are collecting is the same as the data the volunteers in the Huron River watershed are collecting, or Buffalo or Canada. And it just builds more validity into our data. I know that this year, because of the standardizations that have happened with the way that we collect and the way that we report, OEPA is actually going to start giving our data some credibility. And that data might actually be used in decision-making processes rather than just monitoring. So the collaborative follows this common study design framework, where we've got kind of these four buckets that we make sure that we are constantly paying attention to. So when the network was started back in 22, 23, they had a consultant who came on through a grant to really kind of help keep everybody rigid through the early process, to make it really purposeful and systematic so that it could be transferable, to not only like new collaboratives, but to new ideas too. I'm not going to go through all four of these though, because that's a lot. Um, but we make sure that every year we're doing all four of these things, that we are taking the data and analyzing the technical design of it, and then analyzing how are we interpreting it, and is there a better way that we should be interpreting it, and evaluating the program, not just the data and our dissemination of the data, but the program as a whole, and how what needs to change as the program grows and develops. And then also the purpose, like what what are our results and outcomes? Why are we doing the things that we do? And see how that changes every year rather than staying rigid. Okay, so the Lake Erie Basin Assessment Framework, this is the big report that we put out every year. So we kind of defined pretty early on that this is meant to be a screening tool rather than a diagnostic tool, and it's really intended for users uh, users within Levison. So it's meant for, or at least it was. Once it's refined, and I think we're starting to finally get to that refined stage right now that we're in like the fourth year, then it could become available for government entities rather than just users within Levison. Let's see. Education and engagement, so intended users. Program evaluation, that's like the one that I just said. That we're constantly doing it. We're making sure that everyone within the network has equal voice and is continually engaging and evaluating not only how the network is working for them, but how the network is changing and what we need to do to kind of keep up with it. So this looks a lot like the stuff that we put out, that draft of the Lake Erie Basin Assessment Report template. That's our big draft right now that we use. And this is the entire network in a watershed map. This is our watershed widget on Water Reporter. So you can see all of the data for all of the hubs kind of nestled in one place. This is a little closer of a map where you can see kind of the watersheds that are currently in the network. And obviously there are still some data gaps and there are still some coverage gaps. Data gaps kind of parameters, those are on our list of this year. What parameters do we need to add? Flow and macroinvertebrates have kind of been the two at the top of the list that we want to standardize to add to the network. And coverage gaps, there are lots of blank spaces on that map that we'd love to see filled up. And it's starting to fill as we're getting partners in Canada and partners closer to PA, but we still have a long way to go. But I will say this collaboration has been amazing. Like, this collaboration has been what has allowed us to take our very small volunteer program that started very modest and meagerly and scale it up to something that I think is really pulling in solid data that shows a lot of what is happening in our watersheds. So just a little plug about benefits of stream monitoring with LaBaff. If you are not part of LaBaff and or you do not have a volunteer monitoring program, um, Levison and LaBaff have been amazing at supporting our program. Having access to the regional network has been really important for us. A lot of our ideas that we've taken for kind of retaining our volunteers have come from people who have much more experience than I had, who've been monitoring a volunteer program for 20 plus years. Uh, and so we've incorporated their knowledge into what we're currently doing. And while there are standard parameters that you have to monitor if you're part of LaBath or Levison. There's still a lot of flexibility. You can sample additional things. Um, so one thing I forgot to mention earlier, since Levison is just the Lake Erie Basin and it's not the Tusk Basin for us, it was part of one of the things that really attracted us to partnering with Levison was that we could take their equipment and we could still use it in the Tusk Basin. So long as we kind of fulfilled what we promised, that we would monitor these handful of watersheds in the Cuyahoga River Basin, we still had the ability to take their equipment and use it to do some additional monitoring in the Tusk Basin, even though that isn't data they could use. So they were really, really flexible with allowing us to utilize their equipment for a bunch of different reasons. And standardization. And standardization really does give you a clear messaging, right? And comparable analysis. I can look at what's happening in my watershed versus what's happening in Western Ohio. And if I know that if we're both in the network, I know that their volunteers are monitoring the exact same way that we are. Okay, so just a couple more things about LaBath. They give you free monitoring equipment to rent if you need it. Their water reporter tool, the widget, is really cool. Like, that's what we use for our map. Um, it helps really break down exceedances in all of your parameters. They also put out a whole media package when we put out our report for every year, which is really nice for someone like I'm not a marketing person. So not having to come up with the marketing plan for disseminating our information is really, really nice. And they guide you through the process, which has been lovely. Like, there's been people there to help us every step of the way. And I think that's all I have. So I have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you to Sarah Barrow and Summit Soil and Water Conservation District. Um, that was very informative. I feel like I personally learned a lot, and can take away a lot because we're trying to boost up a volunteer program of our own at Chagrin River Watershed Partners. So the volunteer handbook, some celebration. Um, I loved hearing about that, as well as I actually had a question before we get into everyone else's questions. Please feel free to type them in the chat if you have not already. Um, I'm glad you brought up that you have your monitoring equipment available at the libraries. Um, this was actually mentioned at our organization just this past week. Um, and I know you mentioned that people have to present their ID and it's only for 2 days. Um, I believe that equipment is pretty expensive, so I was wondering if there was any more like waiver or liability to that involved.
Yeah, you're right. It is expensive, right? It's like almost $5,000 for a kit.
Yeah.
So all of our volunteers are really, it is explained how expensive it is when they train so that they know to be extra cautious with the equipment. And as are our library hub branch managers. So that's in the waiver that they sign. I understand that things happen, like things are going to happen. Stuff is going to break. But we do ask them to take extra care. And we have a little thing in the waiver about caring for the monitors. Um, and then just the sign out process after that. We make sure that they show an ID, sign it out, and then they have to sign it back in, like
Mhm.
the libraries check it back in. So there's a lot of trust that goes into it because our meters are just out there. Um, but we have a really great group of volunteers. So uh, I don't know, I'm hopeful that we have not had a problem yet.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like they definitely are informed on everything that they need to be. Um, okay, so one question we have is how did you come to June to October for your sampling season? And this was also addressed by another individual that said that macros are best for sampling through June to September. I don't know if you had anything more.
Yep. So for chemistry, part of being in the Levison network is that all all chemistry sampling is done between May 1st and October 31st. Like, that's just our standard sampling season for chemistry. That's what everybody in the network does, so we do it too. Macros, we start. at the either at the very end of May or the first week of June, depending on the temperature. And we usually wrap them up by the end of September, beginning of October. Um, we encourage our volunteers to get out and do macros any point between May and October, but the data that we currently use for macros just comes from in-house. Because a lot of our volunteers are still pretty new at doing macros. And I know if I go out there, I might get a much higher score than the volunteers. So we have not fully started incorporating their macroinvertebrate data into our data yet, because I feel like they just need a little more time to get comfortable with doing the sampling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Similar to that, is the chemistry in the spring worth collecting? I assume so, at least after like the May point, but
I think so after May. We do see we are still seeing chloride jumps in May. Um, so I like to pay attention to that. But honestly, a lot of it is just because that's what our standard for the network is to start in May. So we start in May.
next question is, were the volunteers sampling only on public lands, or did they also sample on private lands? And if so, how did you obtain permission from the landowners for that sampling?
Yes, so we do a bit of both. We try to be on public lands as much as we can because it's just easier. Anytime that we're on or really near private lands, somebody from the watershed department contacts the homeowners first. We send them a letter, let them know this is these are the things that we're going to be doing, and we actually word the letter in a manner of we're going to do it unless you tell us otherwise. So please, send us a letter by such and such a date saying that we aren't allowed on your property. But we found that most homeowners are pretty into it. Like they'd like to know what's going on close to them. So we have yet to have someone tell us no. But anytime that it is private land, we still try to be close to a road or a right of way so that we don't have people wandering way back in somebody's property.
That makes sense, and that's good to hear that people aren't like opposed to it, or find it intrusive because it's just data. Um, and then as well as that question, Zachary said thank you. Christy also says thank you, that was very informative, and that she wants to know your media for collecting data for volunteers. Like,
Mm.
how do you collect this? Is it all hard copy paper forms that they fill out? Have you ventured into electronic fillable online forms like a survey or Google form? Um,
Yeah, so we do a bit of both. We have the opportunity for them to use either or. We have a lot of retirees in our volunteer program who might not necessarily be super comfortable with Google Forms. So we make sure that paper forms are always available in the kits. And then once they fill it out, they just leave it in the kit. And when I pick them up once a month to calibrate the meters, I just take all the filled out forms. But then we also have a Google form where there's a QR code in our kit that'll take them straight to the Google form and they can fill it all out right there. And a lot of our younger volunteers like to use that. And we just input the data ourselves into a spreadsheet.
Great. Um, and I think that really speaks to the importance of being like accessible with your volunteer program, having that at the libraries and for different age groups, because I've also noticed that a lot of volunteers tend to be like retiree age, since they have the time. Yeah. Next question would be, are your exceedances based on a TMDL requirement?
They are not. So our TMDLs for Summit County are phosphorus and E. coli. Um, and we don't have the capability to have volunteers test any of that.
Gotcha. Um, and unless we have any more questions pop up after this one, I think this may be our final. You said that the monitoring kits cost approximately like 5K. What is included in the kits besides the probe?
So the YSI meter itself, and then the the cords that go down to the probe are super expensive. They're like $1,500. And then it has a pH probe, the conductivity and temperature probe, and a DO probe on it. That all itself is 4,700 bucks in a carrying case. And then we've got chloride quant tabs that are in each kit. We also use an Ohio sediment stick, and we teach them all how to do like a basic TSS reading using an Ohio sediment stick. So that's in the kit too. Honestly, We have, which ones do we have? YSI Pro Quattros.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So unless anyone has anything else that they pop into the chat, I think that we can probably wrap this up. Thank you again so much, Sarah. I really appreciate your time, as well as I think everyone else in the chat did. I appreciate that you spend so much time and effort, your dedication, I guess, to environmental education and safe, clean water. Um, Reminder that I will be posting this to the CRWP YouTube page, and I'll send out a follow-up link to that, as well as that survey just for everyone who has attended. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks.